Welcome to the Seikird Healing Podcast, where the old is new, the ancient is innovative, and the forgotten is remembered. We believe that sacred healing is your birthright. Join us on each episode as we uniquely, authentically, and mystically dive into the bold and vulnerable life of many magical humans. From breath, spirituality, shadow work, and all things in the esoteric realm of healing, we don't leave any stone unturned on this bold journey of growth as we start to explore the remembrance of what it means to be human. So take a deep breath in and a deep breath out, and let's get sacred.
Hello, sacred beings. Today, I get to chat with a soul-centered astrologer who is fascinated by the intersection of psychology, astrology, and dreamwork. She is based out of Northern California with a full-time online astrology practice serving a global community. She's a lifelong student of the esoteric, and she's been studying archetypal, psychological, and esoteric astrology since 2017. Her training includes a master's degree in transparent and depth psychology and certifications in Dreamwork and Trauma Studies. She's also deeply connected to her Brazilian homeland, offering astrology readings in both English and in Portuguese. Her big three astrological energies are Sun in Aries, Moon in Leo, and Rising in Cancer. I am so excited for you guys to enjoy this conversation with Bruna, the astrologer and the dreamworker. Hey everyone, welcome to the Seikird Healing Podcast. I'm really pumped today because I get to chat with a fellow Aries. Our birthdays are like maybe 12 days apart, 13 days apart. Super excited. Love an Aries. And I'm really pumped because Bruna came into my life at a really special time. We did not really know each other, but we had friends in the same circle, and we were actually brought together by a beautiful friend, mutual friend named Parker. And Parker, unfortunately passed away, but he's still really with us. And he brought Bruna and I together without even knowing it, because we met after his passing at a beautiful celebration of life for him for his birthday at a farm in Lockhart. And we ended up meeting there over really great conversation, breath work, a beautiful planting of a cactus plant in his honor. And I really felt like he brought us together for a reason, and I'm really just pumped to talk to Bruna today on the podcast, not only because I feel like she has a healing energy, but also she's an esoteric psychological astrologer, and she was Parker's astrologer as well. So really fun weavings in how we met. But also I'm really excited to dive into her services and the medicine that she brings to the world in her study of astrology. So welcome, Bruna, to the show. And I'm really just honored and excited to have you here.
Wow, Jessica, what an intro. My God. The second you started describing how we met, I was just touching my heart and I could feel Parker's presence here. I really could. I really can. Yeah. Yeah. Here's to more introductions through Parker. What a blessing.
Absolutely. And I hope that a bunch of people see this and they're like, wait a minute, I knew Parker, and they feel like they can reach out because yes, and more yes. He's still weaving his magic in the world. So yeah. But yeah, I want to hear more about you. And that was really a brief introduction. An esoteric psychological astrologer. That is how you've kind of introduced yourself to the world. But I'm curious if you could break that down for us. What does that mean? What do you actually do? And I have a tea as well, so we'll be cheersing to all of the fun things we'll be talking about today. But if you could break down what that actually means and what you weave into the world, that would be amazing for all the listeners.
Yeah, so I'll start first with astrologer, right? So astrologer is somebody that is an intuitive science, right? So we use the astrological map as a tool to understand the human experience and the psyche. And what's so beautiful about astrology is that there's many schools, just like psychology. And the schools that I connect with the most is the psychological astrology school. So we weave psychology and astrology together, and we're usually a little bit more depth psychology oriented. So Carl Jung, transpersonal psychology oriented as well. So if you know Ken Wilber. And then we use the astrological map to help engage with different archetypes, right? It's an archetypal language in its essence, astrology. And then the third component of this title is esoteric, right? So esoteric astrology is connected to the teachings of Jal Kul. He is a Tibetan, or was, I should say, a Tibetan master who channeled all of this beautiful work. He channeled 20 books, 20 texts, esoteric texts in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s through this woman called Alice Bailey. So people might have heard of Alice Bailey, sometimes not so much Jal Kul. He also has a title called Master DK that people go by. And esoteric astrology in its essence is adding another layer to the astrological map. So there's the traditional, more psychological astrological map that looks at the personality. But then esoteric astrology has another layer that really looks into the soul of astrology.
Okay. That is a lot to unpack. And I think before we go down like the rabbit hole of these different schools and sciences, I would love to know how you got into this space. So kind of like what brought you to this? What called you into this deeper purpose? Because it feels like your dharma to me when you talk about it. It's like the way that you want to weave your magic and medicine into the world. And speaking of magic, it is like the day before Halloween. We are getting super witchy. We will be getting super witchy. We've got our cauldrons brewing. And yeah, so I'm just curious how you got into this space and like what called you to this dharma and this path.
Yeah, so what called me was I was going through a really hard time. I was going through a really dark time. I was going to turn 29. And so I was 29 years old, looking for more answers, a deeper meaning. I had gotten into the coaching path and I really enjoyed it, but I was feeling there was something more spiritual that I needed to engage with. And I booked this astrology reading for myself. I had never heard of it, like never done a reading before, never studied astrology, just showed up to this reading. And it was recommended by a dear friend at the time. And this reading changed my life, Jessica. It was a profound teacher. I am sure that we have had many experiences in previous lives. And he was 89 at the time. Yeah.
Whoa. Okay. And so how did you find this person being so much older?
Yeah. So I had a friend that was studying under him, and I was just seeing the impact of his work, right, in her life. And that's that, you feel it, like you just said, Bruna, I feel like this is your dharma. You feel it in people, right? And I felt it in her.
Wow. Okay. And so that called you to get a reading by him. And then how did that change your life? And I'm sure we'll weave into like a lot of, because we're both Aries and we like have kind of the same chart, which is actually hilarious. But like, how did that change your life? How did knowing more about yourself and almost like having that remembrance, like change how you wanted to weave this in the world?
Yeah. And so with astrology, the beauty of astrology, one of the beauties of astrology is the power of the word. We word things, right? When you see, so we're magicians in that sense, right?
Casting spells.
Yeah. And so Randall was his name. Randall, when I saw Randall, he worded my Mercury in a way that I've never heard of before. He worded the way my mind works. And it was just such a profound moment of feeling seen. And that his words unlocked something in me that I always had, but it just gave me this opportunity to start using it and noticing it.
Wow. That's really powerful. And then obviously you got into this space, right? And now you're this beautiful weaver of esoteric and psychological astrology. And I want to kind of weave into what's been happening recently in the planet. And we just had a lunar eclipse. And sometimes when you go through this transformation in the planets, it can last and reverberate into the future. And because we're recording this podcast in October near Halloween, but it might not air for a few months, I would love to hear how the recent eclipse may impact us throughout the year over 2024 and what that might look like for everyone who's listening to really kind of get like a nugget of wisdom that they can take with them in the future.
Yeah, so we're meeting at a very potent time astrologically, Jessica, just as you mentioned, and we're in eclipse season. So there is 2 eclipses every 6 months, right? So we had an eclipse on October 14th, and now we just had one on October 28th. So we had the solar eclipse and now the lunar eclipse. Now, this lunar eclipse happened in Scorpio and Taurus axis. Right? So the sun is in Scorpio, Halloween, and then the moon is in Taurus, right? Creating an opposition with these 2 energies. So it's an illumination of something. What's really powerful about eclipses, and what this might be really helpful for the listeners, even if they're listening later, is that whatever's happening right now, whatever's brewing right now in our lives, we're going to be working with for the next 6 months. So eclipses, they can be very helpful in understanding our progression, our development, our own psychological process.
And was there anything like really unique about these 2 eclipses that you can dive into for us?
Yeah, a lot. So the eclipses, what's really interesting, without getting too technical about it, what's really interesting about the eclipses are the nodes of the moon. That's what makes an eclipse, right? So the nodes of the moon, they're currently switching. And so in October 14th, the nodes are in Aries, Libra. Okay. And so they just moved into Aries Libra, Jessica, which is going to be really important for people like me and you because we're Aries, right? So there is a larger driving force for us. And this was on October 28th. It was the last eclipse for 8 years in Taurus, Scorpio. Okay. So for the listeners, look back in November of 2021. Okay, you've been working with something Scorpio Taurus in your life. So something around your values, around money, finances, investments, your worth. Okay, since 2021, and now it's coming to a close, some sort of close. Okay, and then in the same month, we've opened a new Aries Libra portal, which is about our sense of self, our individuation, but how we collaborate, how we connect with others, how we dialogue with others, right? How we partner with others.
Well, that feels really alive because you and I are coming into this like beautiful dialogue today and also like partnering on bringing more knowledge around this to the world. So thank you for that. And yeah, I definitely feel that like from 2021 to now, that kind of like shift of like trying to organize financials in my life and like the worth in my life, and then moving that and shifting that. And I'm feeling that energy a lot coming up. Yeah, that's exciting. And so you said that this particular alignment doesn't happen for another 8 years. Is that right?
Yeah, the Scorpio and Taurus axis. Yeah. Yeah, the eclipse in those energies. So this is a time of culmination.
And so the what we're asking for and any seeds we're planting and any magic we're weaving into the world or things that we're asking for from the universe, those are just little seeds that we're planting now. And then, like you mentioned, 6 months down the line and reverberating into our lives, those will continue to now then cultivate and start growing and showing up.
Yes, beautifully said. Yeah. And a lot of the times we don't even notice it, right, Jessica? And so I love astrology because it helps me be more conscious. It gives me a map of, okay, let me look back what was happening in my life in November 2021. And then I think back and I'm like, oh, wow, there's a pattern that I wouldn't have noticed with that interesting connection that I have with this project and what I'm dealing with now.
Mm.
And you probably feel this in your life. So much of our lives is just cycles repeating itself, right? And we're hopefully spiraling up, right? But it's a spiral.
Yeah. I've actually felt that and been kind of weaving the more like cyclical and circular kind of web into my life rather than saying like, oh, this is a chapter and it's done. It's like, no, it's not like that. It doesn't stop. It continues to transcend itself and it continues to build on top of what I've already learned. And it really does feel like that coil weaving. It doesn't feel like this chunk and then move it to the side. It's not part of you anymore. It stops. It's like, no, it actually gets to be included and then transcended into the next version of who I want to become. And so it does feel like this really big circle. And somebody asked me recently because I was ending a project that I was working on. They were like, oh, like, does it feel like the end? I'm like, no, it actually just feels like the beginning. It feels like I'm just starting over again because I've integrated what I've learned. I'm ready to like hold that in my body somatically. And now I get to like take that into the future and weave it into something else. Right. And so I think that kind of chunking that we tend to do throughout our lives. Well, I was in my 20s, so I'm not like that anymore. Well, you have that as a piece of you, right? And it's a part of you. And so then you get to weave and integrate that into your life. And so I really do feel that whenever I look to, like you said, look to astrology as almost like a map. It's kind of like a little treasure map. You always get to like find new things about yourself, but also you get these little gems and pearls that you're like, well, damn, I didn't realize that then, but now I'm seeing how and why this happened. And not always to say like happens for a reason, but there are synchronicities that weave into life that astrology really, really helps with. Yeah, I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit more, like just that topic.
I loved how you said it, Jessica, because it gave me such an imagery of us spiraling through life. And even the way the astrological chart is built, right? It's a wheel and we see the planets moving through this wheel. These are called the transits in the sky. And how they're impacting these same natal planets that we have over and over again, trying to teach us lessons. Mm-hmm. But hopefully, as we integrate these lessons, we get to learn in the higher octave every time, hopefully. Right?
Hopefully. That's the goal, right? And hello, sacred humans. Quickly, I want to share with you something I've added into my daily rituals that has me buzzing, and that is Rise Mushroom Coffee. Rise entered my life through my Instagram algorithm that obviously knows what products I like, and I gave it a try and just wow, it has amazingly delicious flavor. Not only this, they also have a mushroom matcha powder. Mind blown. And they're filled with superfoods and super mushrooms. What I like about Rise is that they use 100% organic ingredients, and their mushroom farms are located in California. If you've always always wanted to try mushroom coffee but haven't yet pulled the trigger, this is your moment. And there is zero risk because they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you're interested in the deliciousness of Rise mushroom elixirs, head to the show notes and you will find a link for 20% off your first order. Or simply use the discount code Jessica, all caps, at checkout. That's JESSICA, all caps, at checkout. And now, let's get back to our amazing episode of the Seikird Healing Podcast. Some of the things that you do, you offer one-to-one services for readings, astrological readings that are really based on science. And so I thought it was really fun because you came up with the idea to actually like bring a live reading here with my chart, which I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this, right? And so I would love to kind of weave into that piece of this conversation, but also kind of wanted to set the stage that your birthday is March 29th, mine's April 10th, and we have similar birthdays. And I was curious if, like, when you were looking at my chart, did you see similarities in your chart and my chart? Just kind of curious on that.
Yeah, Jessica. Yeah. So we both have the sun in Aries by being so close in terms of our birthdays. And one of the things that was so beautiful is that you also have the same Mercury that I have. So you have the sun in Aries, which is your conscious self. It's the way you want to express yourself in the world, which is very similar to me. We're initiators. We like to do new things. We like to be pioneers. We can be very altruistic. We can also be a little bit impulsive and impatient with life. And the way our minds work, Mercury, right? It's the way we communicate, the way we talk, the way we write, the way we listen, is connected with Pisces energy, which is water, which is through the intuition, which is through imagery, dreams. And it was even beautiful because you were just talking right now about the spiral. And when you were talking, I could see the imagery that is in your mind, but then also connects with my mind, right? We are nonlinear thinkers.
Yeah. It's so funny that you mentioned dreams too, because I've been tracking my dreams since January of 2023 and up till now. So almost a full year. And I'm planning to go back and really like integrate all of these like beautiful dreams. And it's like, you know, when I wake up, I just like free form write, just to try and remember. And the more that I write, the more I remember. And I've noticed the more I've started to remember, the more I'll remember more. And then like even a day or two later, I'll remember a dream from like a week ago that I hadn't remembered. And so it's almost like this recall is happening with my brain. And so I thought it was interesting that you just mentioned dreams, and we could probably go like for like a huge tangent on dreams as well.
A whole another episode on dreams.
we might have to schedule that because I've been really diving into dreams. And we also talked a little bit before we started recording about the Red Book, which is behind me, Carl Jung's book. And he really gets into like studying dreams. And so it kind of like prompted me to dive a little bit deeper into that and kind of like, what are the meanings behind these dreams? And like, and sometimes it's just like, I dreamed about like, you know, a pencil, like it's like something stupid, right? But like, sometimes they're really profound. And I'm like, damn, that one was really good. So some of them, go ahead.
No, and even the ones about the pencil, when we actually work with the pencil and connect with the pencil, it can be a profound message as well. Absolutely. From our psyche. Yeah. I one of my dear colleagues, friends, Dr. Mady Santos, she says that dream work is free therapy.
Woo.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you want to comment on the Red Book? Because I know you mentioned earlier that the way that you weave your science plus astrology into the world is kind of from a Carl Jung brain. So I'm curious how you weave that into your work.
Yeah, it's a big part of my work because at the time, so going back, you know, when I was talking about Randall and going to see an astrologer for the first time, there were various things that were happening in my life. One, like I was going down the coaching path, but wanted to deepen it. And so I went to see this astrologer, and simultaneously I got the hit that I needed to get my master's in psychology. And so that's when I got a master's in transpersonal depth psychology. And I was seeing them as different, astrology and psychology in different realms. And I was just more so using astrology as a personal tool for my own development, my own personal development. However, when I started studying psychology and started studying Carl Jung, I came across the Red Book. And actually it was in the Black Books, his Black Books, he sketched astrological charts. And so that's when I started realizing, like, no, they work together. They're not separate sciences. And it wasn't that Carl Jung was an astrologer, but he used astrology as a tool to work on his clients. And so it almost gave me permission, Jessica, of like, no, Bruna, you can go on this path. It's not like you're denying the psychological path, and you're integrating it.
Wow, that's really special. And also in the integration of that, you've kind of like created a new era of astrology in the world where it doesn't have to be one thing in a box by itself. It can be this really, like you mentioned, esoteric and psychological at the same time. Those two worlds can marry each other. And then it can be using data points plus using some astral realm shit and like marrying it together.
Yeah. It's, more than 2,000 years, right? Like it's an very ancient science, one of the oldest science we have. And it gave me permission to find my community, right? Because at first I was like, wow, Carl Jung opened this door for me. He was a true pioneer in many ways, but also he opened the door for me to find other people around the world that have already been doing this. Right. So Liz Green is a fantastic astrologer in London that has a whole psychological astrology school. And then I realized, I was like, oh, wow, I'm truly not alone in this.
Yeah. And it's one of those things too, where like we don't often feel the impact of astrology on our lives because we live in a world that has so much light pollution now. And so thinking back like to the ancient realms of how people really were able to be so informed about the sky and the stars and the planets and alignment, and not only informed, but like it was the basis for entire civilizations and ancient civilizations to know when to seed, when to harvest, when to do certain things in the world in order to survive. We've just been using this technology for so long, and it is truly a technology that has somewhat been forgotten because we can't really see properly.
Yeah. It's important that you're using the word technology, right? Because I find that people, as we're moving into the Aquarian age and Pluto's moving into Aquarius, we're going through this huge shift this year. It's a new cycle, a 20-year cycle where technologies are changing. And we're seeing the rise of artificial intelligence, the internet, all of that. And we're also seeing new technologies with astrology being considered as forms of healing. We're also seeing a lot of work with somatic practices, right? And that's another technology as well, Jessica, that I find is so crucial for the Aquarian age.
Yeah. And it's funny because this is such an ancient system, right? It's an ancient system that we've used for a long time. And now when you get to marry that with modern technology, like now everyone has, the astrology apps where they're like, oh, where are the planets in the sky? Like guilty as charged. Love it.
Yeah.
Love a night sky app.
Yeah.
Because we can't always see, right? Because of the light pollution. And so it's kind of important to know exactly where things are in the sky, how things are aligned, when our eclipses are, when our full moons are, when our super moons are, so that we can really align ourselves and attune our internal systems and bodies, especially for women who have cycles based on the moon.
Yes.
So it's just so important that we look at it, like you said, on a somatic level, as well as a data technology.
So the somatic piece, right? Really important. And the best thing when I'm talking to people where they don't really connect with astrology yet, but they're leaning in, I can see that they're curious. I will first go to the moon, right? And I will say, okay, the moon is changing signs every 2.5 days, and the moon connects with the currents, right? We know that. If you're a surfer, you know that you must follow the moon. And we're 80%, 70, 80% water, right? If the moon's impacting the ocean, of course, the moon's going to be impacting our own system. Mm-hmm. Right. And then I say to people, I don't believe in astrology. I experience astrology. So use the moon, right? Use the moon every 2.5 days. This is how I started learning astrology, Jessica. It wasn't books. And then Randall said, for a year, you're just going to follow the moon. That's it. And feel the moon, right? So for 1 year, every 2.5 days, I was tracking the moon using an app. So there we go, the technology, right? And then experiencing, okay, what is this moon in Cancer? What is this moon in Gemini? And then experiencing what was happening in my life, what was around me, because every chart, we all have different charts. So a moon in Cancer is going to feel different for me than it might for you, right, Jessica? Because it's traveling through a different part of your chart. So that's how I first started to experience astrology. And I view astrology as extremely experiential. It's not, of course, we need the cognitive part. You need to study it and understand the symbols, but there's so much experience.
Wow. Okay. So I love how you put that. And also I can feel it in my body, just the way that you're talking about it. And so let's weave back into the real chart. Let's go down this rabbit hole. And just so everyone knows, we have not done this previously. I have no idea what Bruna is gonna say or what my chart says. I haven't done a chart previously in a professional way, so this is really new for me, and hopefully it will be really interesting for everyone listening as well.
Okay, wonderful, Jessica. And see, even for the listeners hearing how Jessica and I are talking and how we're weaving things, Jessica used the word weaving a lot, and how we'll bring up one topic and then we'll go in this direction, then we'll come back to it. This is Mercury in Pisces that both Jessica and I have. Right? We can go down several rabbit holes and then come back. This is water.
My husband hates that. Yeah. He's like, but you just went. And I'm like, hold on, I'll come back. Just give me a moment.
I got it.
I'm getting there.
Yeah. It's great for storytelling. It really is. So I'm opening up your chart, Jessica. And so what Jessica's seeing basically is a natal chart. And so I have her birthday up here and the exact time that she was born. And based on this information and the location, we get this precise map. It's a 2-dimensional map of the heavens, the moment that Jessica took her first breath on this earth. Okay. So essentially what you're seeing, Jessica, you're seeing that there's a wheel with 12 different sections. These are called houses. Each of these sections connect to a different life theme. Okay, so in astrology, we're looking at your identity. We're looking at your sense of home, belonging, how you relate with other people, your career, and so on. Okay. In each of these sections, you're going to see different planets or celestial bodies, because I use a lot of asteroids too. And they talk about a specific part of how you act. This is parts work. This is where psychology comes in, right? Each of these planets is a different part of your psyche. And then in the larger wheel in the outside, you'll see a layer full of symbols of the constellations or the signs. So from Aries all the way to Pisces, and they color the planet. So they give the planet a flavor, right? So like we were talking about Mercury is the mind, it's communication for everyone. But depending on what sign it's in, it's going to give it a different flavor. And so, in your case, Jessica, immediately when I open up your chart, I see your sun in the 4th house, right? So the sun down here, and in Aries, right? But what's fascinating about you is that the North Node, which looks like a horseshoe, okay, the North Node is right next to your sun. And then you also have Jupiter, which looks like a fancy number 4, right next to the North Node and the sun. So these 3 energies really close together. I'm like, ooh, she's a serious Aries.
I think anyone in my life would just say, yep, thumbs up. It tracks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so the sun in Aries, as we mentioned, is about assertion, drive, momentum, impulse to act, but also willpower, right? There is a lot of energy for us to get moving, right? And for us to inspire those around us. Fire energy, Aries is fire, can be very inspiring. Now, the North Node tells us it's the point of destiny, Jessica. And this is not common for everybody, okay? When we have the sun and the North Node in the same energy, it means that you being your Aries self, hopefully in the higher octave, is part of your destiny in this lifetime. Like that's where you need to keep going. You need to keep initiating things. You need to keep understanding your sense of self, your independence. I'll use a Jungian term here. Individuation is really important for you. So I would say even like in your podcast, having conversations with how people have individuated throughout their lives, how they have initiated things will be huge for you. Okay. And then the third component, Jupiter, the teacher, the endless seeker, somebody that's always trying to search for the meaning of life. I mean, for you, traveling, exploring, it doesn't even need to be physical travel. Like you can travel to many realms through the Red Book, right, Jessica? But you're here to expand your mind, to have new perspectives.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's definitely everything is to the T, like hitting in my heart center. I'm currently reading the Emerald Tablets book, and it's like, and what you said about always seeking, always learning, that's just been a constant throughout my entire life. So it's really just like landing, but also not just learning to learn, but learning to then make another move on a chessboard. Like I'm always trying to move forward, grow something, and create something in the world. But I like to do it data informed. And so I love learning, and then I love making moves and pushing forward and making decisions, sometimes a little bit with impulse as well, because I've got that in there. Like I make very quick decisions, but some of them are, most of the time they're like semi-informed and or ultra informed, because I like to learn so much and go so deep.
Beautiful. So now, and this happens a lot in readings with me, is like when I talk about a specific part, another part of their psyche starts to show up. And so we talked about Aries archetype in you, but now who's actually coming up is your moon in Virgo. And the moon in Virgo is saying, okay, I'm calculated though. Right? So the moon is your internal self, is how you express emotions, how you feel safe and secure in the world. So there's a part, and this is kind of funny about you, Jessica, because there's a part of you that wants to drive, that wants to go, is not scared, is brave, is courageous. But then internally, it's like, okay, but we need all the data points. That's the Virgo moon.
Yeah, it's so funny because they both of them want to drive sometimes too.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute. Hold on. I'm driving here. It's like they're on my shoulder. But it's so funny because this is a new version of a podcast that I'm weaving into the world, the Seikird Healing Podcast, which is like really weaving those two together. My old podcast that I had with my co-host Svetlana a few years ago was called Bold and Vulnerable. And to me, it was like the marrying of the Aries, like the risk taker, and the vulnerable side of what you're talking about now, which is like the Virgo coming up. And it's something that I didn't even know, but it was just coming through.
Wow. And the beauty of astrology is that it helps us. There's 3 A's that I always talk about. So the first is awareness. So it's like, okay, I'm aware that I have these 2 different parts of me. And then we accept it. Right? It's like, it's a tool to help us work with it. Then we understand where it might be coming in on a day-to-day, a more practical sense. And then the third one is alignment to act. So we align these energies that they're not against each other, right, Jessica? You need the sun in Aries and the moon in Virgo for this podcast. They're so important. And, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. Keep going. I'm so interested and so listening.
The other thing that's fascinating is that astrology, to me, when I'm working with this tool, it starts to talk to me in patterns, right? Because in its essence, it's the study of patterns for me. And it will usually start to repeat the same message over and over again. And that is of you being an explorer, Jessica. I would say that's probably your biggest archetype. And because you have the sun conjunct with Jupiter, so that we talked about the teacher, the philosopher, the seeker. And then your moon in Virgo is in the 9th house, which is the house of Jupiter. So here it is, the explorer. So that moon in Virgo, she serves exploration. She wants organization. She wants concrete thinking in order to feel safe, but in order to explore, to seek the meaning of life. Okay. And then the third pattern is your rising sign. So your rising sign is the energy that's on the horizon line right when you were born. So when you were coming out of your mom's womb, on that day, on that time, it's the exact time, Sagittarius was on the horizon line. And Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, again, the teacher, the seeker, the philosopher. So you are a lifelong learner. You are in this lifetime, right? And you're here to, the higher frequency of Sagittarius is that you are here through your own questioning and your own seeking. And always having that question, right? Because sometimes Sagittarius in the dark side, it can know the answer or be self-righteous. But you're being the student here to inspire others to ask more questions.
Ooh, okay. And so when you're looking at this chart, your cursor's over near that horizon line, like the 15-degree. Yeah. And so what are all those... and maybe I'm getting ahead of your reading, but what are all of those there, like all of these symbols under this? Does that have anything to do with this, or is that something separate?
Absolutely, it's connected. Yeah.
Okay.
So the first house, so Jessica's pointing to the first house because right on the ascendant starts her first house, which the first house is the house of identity and who she is, right? How people are going to perceive her as well. And Jessica, whenever we have planets there, those planets are going to be very important into our identity, what people see in us. And you have Saturn in Sagittarius, Uranus in Sagittarius, and you have Ceres, which is an asteroid in Capricorn, and Neptune in Capricorn. That's a lot of energy. Overall, what I would say is that there is this, again, there's a lot of integrity and a lot of commitment and discipline and responsibility in being the seeker, right? Like you hold that responsibly. There's this groundedness to you with that exploration. But then there's that part of you, that's Saturn, Then there's that part of you that wants to break the mold, that wants to awaken, that wants to liberate, that wants to think outside the box of what society believes. That's Uranus. And then finally, Neptune in Capricorn is the pragmatic dreamer. Okay, so when you have those three there in your first house, it calls in a lot of leadership qualities. It calls in the weaving with transpersonal elements within our consciousness, the collective consciousness, right? So there's a part of you that feels like, oh, I want to understand things on a collective level as well.
Okay. Thank you for being so understandable when I'm looking at this chart and I'm like, what am I looking at here? You have such a really wonderful way of helping me understand it on a deeper level. So I appreciate that. And so maybe,
can I ask you a question there?
Sure.
Yeah. How did it feel when I expressed all of these planets in the first house? How did that land for you?
It landed as if I need to do more deeper study into those planets and what they mean and what they bring, because I, first of all, didn't know that they were in my chart because I've never gotten a reading before. And also, like, there could be synchronicities that I find once I go and do the work. And so it kind of, the way that I felt in my body was a call to a deeper sense of learning more about how this is weaved throughout my entire life. And then I had this thought that was like, oh, wow. Okay. So this is like the day that I arrived on the planet, which now is like bringing up the Lion King for me, because the day we arrived on the anyway, I could go into the circle. The day I arrived on the planet. But then I also was thinking like, oh, and maybe this is or isn't a thing in astrology, but I wanted to, a question came up for me that I'm thinking, oh, well, what was happening on the date of conception? And how, and does that like weave into astrology at all? Or is that like, it starts on this day when you come into the earth?
Yeah. I mean, as above, so below, right? So many things are connected. That's something that I also did too, Jessica. When I started working with astrology, I went back to understand what was happening in the collective, like what were the news that were happening in the world the day that I was born. And of course, not only just my family of origin story, right? What was happening in my family system? What did my mom go through with her birth? But in the collective as well, because yes, those energies that are in us are also in the collective being worked through.
That's so interesting, because literally yesterday, I was at my parents' house kind of doing some cleaning of like stuff that just has been left behind. And I found a box and I opened it up and it had all like my birth announcement in the newspaper. And my mom had like a stack of cards that people had given her. And then I looked at it real quick because I was like, did I give Bruna the right time? Like 3 months ago when we talked, I did give you the right time. It was 11:50 p.m. And I was like, oh, I got it right. And then there's a whole like pack of newspapers from the month that I was born. And so I have all that information. I just need to go. I didn't have time to like read them, but now I will.
What a gold mine. I love it. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Mom. Shout out to Mom.
And maybe this is part of why we're having this reading right now, right? This live reading, Jessica, as an encouragement for you to go in there. There's probably some sort of treasure or treasures in those newspapers for you to understand yourself.
Yeah, I'm excited now. That's really cool. Okay. Yeah, that's what came up for me. I was feeling really aligned too. You mentioned like leadership qualities. I've always been somebody that strived to be a leader in any space that I'm in. And the way that I used to show up kind of like earlier in my life was very Aries, like very overpowering, overtaking, almost to a point of detriment in my life, like to a point where like I was like way too leady, you know,
Yeah.
to where now, or over the past, you know, probably 7 years, I've seen more of that Virgo weave in and come to leadership from a space of deep listening and a space of collaboration and more around the collective rather than around like the self, which was kind of what was guiding my younger leadership qualities and would get me into places that I didn't necessarily want to be. So I'm seeing that transform and that weave throughout not only like professional career, but also through my life in general.
That resonates so deeply within me, Jessica, and my own journey too, as the Aries sun. And usually what we say through psychological astrology and also esoteric astrology is that, you know, your sun sign, you're working with it for a while. And then when you go into your Saturn's return at 29 years old, then you start to work a lot more with other planets in terms of your identity, right? It becomes a little bit more multivalent. And what I've noticed with me is that now I'm starting to come back to Aries because I was rejecting it at first. I was like, oh my God, I'm too much, right? Like I need to go somewhere else in my chart. And now I'm like, oh wow, okay, but I know a healthier way to work with this Aries.
Yeah, and there is a healthy way to work with Aries. And I think other fire signs may experience this as well, but there is a healthy way to weave that, and it's magic. Like Aries can be super fucking powerful and magical, but
I see it as the magician in the tarot.
Yeah. Today I want to share with you all the delicious cacao with a K, ceremonial grade drinking chocolate. Cacao is one of my favorite brands of ceremonial grade cacao, and it's a delicious addition to my morning routine. Cacao is jam-packed with delicious nutrients that work with my body to stay energized and connected and focused. What I also love about cacao is that they are a nonprofit on a mission to protect the native heirloom strands of cacao in Peru and Guatemala by giving back to the farmers and communities that make it available for us. If you are interested in cacao with a K, go to the show notes and you will find a link for 10% off your first order, or simply by using the discount code Jessica, all caps, at checkout. That's JESSICA, all capital letters, at checkout. It is more of a magician type of an archetype where there's so much power in it, but it's almost like we're like the little baby Harry Potters that haven't figured out how to wield the power yet. And it comes so strong. And then when you start to learn to access that, you know, Kali energy in a really healthy way, then you start to weave this different type of magic into the world that I've found has been really, really powerful and more penetrating than the like fire destruction, like burn it to the ground energy. It's just a different way.
Yeah. I'll meditate on that one, the difference of it being penetrating versus destructive. Yeah. And then what I was going to say after that, you know, it's like we come from our moon. So usually the moon we start to feel when we're in the womb, Jessica. So, and that's why a lot of the times we connect the moon to our mother, right? But it's a lot more than just being like, oh, my mother has Virgo energy. No, this is like how you want it to be nourished. It's a little bit more complex.
And is the moon up at the top? Is that where
that's it. Yeah, this is the moon in Virgo.
Okay.
Yeah, in the ninth house. Exactly, Jessica. So you come from this moon, you feel it, but it's more internal, right? It's that little voice in you, or sometimes big voice in you, that wants protection, right? And then the sun, you start to feel it as a toddler, especially when you start speaking and you start to ask for what you desire in life. And then what esoterics believe, this is more esoteric astrology, is that the rising sign is more connected to your soul. Okay. And this is actually in esoteric astrology, we believe we come with the same rising sign for many lifetimes, if you believe in having multiple lives. And we're working with it, right? And for you, what you're like, part of this lifetime is for you to use that moon and that sun to get to your rising sign. And there's this beautiful mantra associated. All of the signs have mantras connected to it in soul-centered astrology. And there's this beautiful mantra for Sagittarius, which is, I see the goal, I reach the goal, and then I see another. And it's, again, this endless explorer that's seeing a goal, reaching a goal, and then going after another, right? But here's the beauty of it. You know how I was saying how in esoteric astrology, there's 2 levels? Well, in traditional astrology, Jupiter rules Sagittarius, but you have that formed, right? Like you're pretty Jupiterian in your task, in your life. That's not an issue for you to access. But in soul-centered astrology, the ruler of Sagittarius is the earth, Jessica. So it's about you grounding all of these explorations you go in. So it's about you reading the bread book or doing all of these different projects, but then coming back and being like, okay, how do I make this physical plane better?
Wow, thank you for that explanation. And are there any other, you mentioned that I have a lot of Jupiter, obviously, from this chart, we can see that. I kind of want to double click on Jupiter for a little bit because I don't know too much about it as a planet and like what essence it brings. Can you speak to Jupiter just a tad more?
Yeah, so Jupiter is connected to Zeus, right? And it's, if we look astronomically, I love studying the planets astronomically as well, because they give us a lot of information. Jupiter's the most expansive planet we have in our solar system. It's massive. It has 80 moons. So just by looking at its astronomy, we get a sense of how it might impact our psyche, right? So it's too much sometimes. It's expansion. It is growth, right? And we talked a lot about the knowledge part. And so what I say about Jupiter is we need to be mindful of these Jupiter transits. And in your case, it lives in you a lot, where it's about, okay, am I fine? I know what I want to seek, and I'm going after this expansion and this growth. Now, how can I align it where I don't overwhelm myself with it, where I don't maybe burn out in your case, right, Jessica, where I don't start a lot of new things at the same time, right? And I kind of channel. Yeah. And you channel
like, I have some little spinning plates. It's fine. I just have a lot of spinning plates in the air. I always say that. But yeah, I tend to start a lot of things at once. I do finish them though. I'm definitely like, I'm a project finisher, but I start a lot of things and I have a lot of things going at the same time always.
Well, yeah, of course you finish them, because the moon in Virgo will not let you not finish. Yeah.
That's funny. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, thank you for kind of going off a tangent about Jupiter. I was just curious on that planet. And then going into some of these on that horizontal line on the line of where the first house where we're seeing like all this activity.
The rising sign.
Yes, in the rising sign. And so you mentioned the third little nugget down. It's
so this is Ceres or Ceres. She's an asteroid. I use asteroids. I use 4 different asteroids. I use Ceres, Demeter, Juno, and Vesta. And because they connect a lot with the feminine psyche, right? And I find that we need to have more archetypes that connect with the feminine psyche. Because if we look in traditional astrology, we only have the moon and Venus, which are huge, 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 huge. But my soul was wanting more archetypes that spoke to my own life experience. And so I started studying them. I actually am teaching a course right now on 4 asteroids, Jessica. And so anyway, going down here to Ceres, Ceres is connected to the mother. archetype. Also the child, right? So if you look in the mythology of Ceres, Demeter in Greek mythology, Demeter was Persephone's mother. And so when Persephone was abducted into the underworld, she grieved, and that's how the seasons were created, right? So for you, having Ceres in Capricorn, there is a soul mission with motherhood here in this lifetime, right? And it might not be you being an actual mother, it's an archetypal language, right? So it's you being a mother through the projects that you create, right? Because Capricorn calls in for the CEO, right? But it could also be you as a mother, right? If you choose to have children. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. And I love that you're studying these 4 unique, kind of different callings that are more feminine in nature. I feel like that's really, really unique and very, I don't know, just very cool how you're integrating that in there. I love that.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah. It's an area of astrology where there's where it was of course developed by Demetra George in the 70s, but there needs to be a lot more work there, I find, and it makes me excited that more astrologers are getting into it. Yeah,
very cool.
Yeah, and so those are the main elements, right? What I just described, I started with the sun, then I went to the moon and the rising, and so these 3 are considered your big 3. And we see them a lot in apps. I think that's the next step. Most people know their sun sign, and then if they start to dabble into astrology, they'll get to know their big 3, which are essential. So the way I see it is your sun is your sense of self, your moon is how you feel safe and secure in the world, your internal self, and then the rising is where your soul needs to grow. Then after we go through those, what I find very important for you is looking at Venus in Pisces, and then also Mercury in Pisces. Okay. Mercury, we talked a lot about already, which is the way you communicate, the way you think. And so that gives it a different flavor. You're not your traditional Aries because you have this Mercury in Pisces. But then Venus in Pisces, Jessica, Venus is the way we love. It's the way we connect with others. It's the way in which we relate with our friends, but also our lovers. And Venus in Pisces it reminds me of that emoji that's melting, So Venus in Pisces, when I think of Venus, I think of her in Pisces, I think of her in like this luxurious bathtub that has like all of the most luxurious items, but also she is like in liminal space as she is sitting there in the bathtub, dreaming about what she's going to do next. Right. And that's, the way you love and the way you express your love is very much in the imaginal realm, I would imagine. It makes you very compassionate. It makes you very sensitive to Jessica. And it's, the most powerful thing about this Venus is that it's directly opposing your moon. So see that line that connects the moon and Venus? And so this Venus is balancing, she's softening that moon in Virgo that wants things structured and precise. That Venus in Pisces is like, oh, Jessica, just surrender a little bit. We're just here to connect with other people.
Wow, beautiful. Very cool.
How did you connect with Venus when I described that?
When you gave the imagery of like just like being almost like in the bath with all the things and like getting into that imagination realm, it made me feel connected to how I love to like set a container. So like even just like my house and like the space that I'm in, I feel called to like set my container in a very specific way because it impacts the way that I feel. And so like I have to like not have to, but it makes me feel really great when I have certain things to set my container in my space. And then it allows me to then soften and relax into deeper thinking and deeper knowing. And when my container or my house or my space is chaotic, my brain is chaotic too. And so that energy of like really balancing, like setting the space. And it's actually really alive for me right now because I just moved 3 times and I'm like just able to like relax into my new space. And it's because I was able to like really set my container. And it's almost like I can't do anything else until I do that. And I've also been traveling a lot too and doing breathwork ceremonies. And I was just in London and I led a ceremony and was at a conference speaking. And then I went right to Sedona for a week and a half and was in the vortex and like, you know, had a ton of ceremony there and meditation and breathwork and a lot of different things. And then kind of like coming out, this is my first week back into my space. And like before I could even get on this podcast with you, I had to like literally like set the entire room. Like I was like, no, this needs to be a sanctuary, like, or I can't even record this podcast. So I was feeling that.
Yeah. And just the way you described it, it's like the Venus is the goddess in you, right? And it's like in order for the goddess to come out in you and feel safe to come out and to go into this dream world and this creative realm, the moon in Virgo needs to come in first, right? And so that gives you kind of a map of like, what do you actually experience on a day-to-day? And then, which is so helpful, I find, Jessica, because when you're trying to access this Venus in Pisces and she's not coming out, you can be like, okay, maybe I need to tend to my moon in Virgo first, right? But yeah, for the listeners hearing us, think about your charts and where your Venus is. And this is going to describe a lot of the way you want to relate with other people and how you connect with what you love. Usually, wherever our Venus is, we love being in that place. It's very pleasurable. And the beautiful thing for you, Jessica, is that you have Venus and Mercury in Pisces in the 3rd house. The 3rd house is about communication, podcast, right? It's like your podcast. I would say if you were to come and see me and you were like, Bruna, I want to launch a podcast, what should it be about? I would say it should include something in the spiritual realm, in the dream realm, in the imaginal realm, because Mercury wants to open that up for you. And Venus loves it. Like she's going to have so much fun exploring that realm.
Oh, that feels so good. Feels so good because we haven't even launched the podcast yet. I've just been recording episodes, getting ready to launch. So it feels really good to know that these parts of me are going to get to play a little bit more in this space. And in a different way than my other podcasts kind of allowed, because it was more entrepreneurship and biohacking. And we got into some of the spiritual realms there, but not like to the degree that I feel like will happen on this new podcast. So I'm really, really excited to dive into that.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So landing.
Yeah. And so so the general things, I think, as we come into close, with your chart, because I also don't want to overwhelm you so much, Jessica, with all of these things, because there's so much for you to sit with. I would say my recommendation for you is ask yourself, like, am I honoring the Sun, Jupiter, North Node? How am I honoring it, actually? Right? Where have I already honored it? Because it's a big life path for you. And it deserves to be honored. Right? And what are the ways in which I want to continue growing in that part of my life? And then how is that Sun helping me reach the ascendant? Right? Helping me open up new doors for people to think about things in a different way, for people to ask more questions and seek the meaning of life, of their own life.
Yeah, lots to sit with here. And I appreciate you going into my chart and using me as a guinea pig to show folks kind of some of the intricacies in which you weave your magic into these charts, and I know we could probably go on for 4, 5, 6 more hours, maybe lifetimes.
Yes.
But yeah, I wanna kind of shift into what you are creating in the world, because you are also an Aries. What are your big three, just out of curiosity?
Yeah. So Sun in Aries, Moon in Leo. So a lot of fire.
A lot of fire.
And then the rising is Cancer. So the rising
Ooh,
is
wow.
water. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you're weaving a lot of magic into the world. We're going to continue to use the word weaving because it just sounds really
Yes.
good
I
in the
love
space of astrology. It sounds great. Weave a big tapestry. You're a creatrix in a way of your building, and I want to kind of double click more on some of the things that you're working on, because we've talked about you're creating a school, which love, because you're getting to marry this master's degree with your really intense dharmic knowledge of astrology. So I want to talk about how you're weaving that into the world. And also, that's more of the path for astrologers or future astrologers, who are folks who want to be in the realm of astrology to learn more about astrology. But you also offer one-on-ones, like you just did with me, on a more in-depth scale. So wanted to kind of weave into kind of your services and what you're creating in the world.
Yeah, Jessica, so much is happening and opening up for me. And one of the things, so I have one-on-one readings with people. And so if you want to explore your natal chart, it's a great way to do it one-on-one. But I also work with clients long-term as well. And this is the psychology part of me. So if people are going through a tougher transit or a moment in their lives, they can work with me every month or once a season. So do a whole year with me. And that's called the solar journey. And then on the school element, so this is part of my Cancer rising, right? So I'm using my Aries sun to initiate things, to be courageous and bold into going into esoteric astrology, and opening a school in May with a dear friend, colleague, Dr. Mady Santos, and it's going to be called Lighted House, which is connected to Cancer, because the mantra of Cancer is, I build a lighted house and therein dwell. And the idea of the lighted house, which Parker also had a rising in Cancer. Okay, so I feel Parker blessing there too. The idea of lighted house is to build a school, a home for people that want to explore psychological astrology and want to explore esoteric astrology, because there's not many schools of that nature. And the time is now. Yeah.
The time is definitely now. And knowing like what Parker was weaving into the world and is still weaving into the world, it just seems like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. It's the same house. It's really, really funny, because I have a lot of Aries friends in my life, and I also have a lot of Cancer friends in my life. Like, it's just really weird. I've just weaved in a way where Cancers find me and we get along because we're so opposite. And so I love that Cancer energy. And it's like always, it's been like following me into my life. My mom's a Cancer, like 3 of my best friends are Cancers.
Wow.
I'm like, they're following me. Get away from me.
There's medicine there, Jessica.
I know. Definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's so interesting to hear how your mantra is even playing a big role in what you're creating, and really kind of setting the stage for you to bring this into the world in a way that feels really good. And also it's a co-creation with somebody too, which you mentioned earlier is weaving through the collective.
Through the collective. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, me and her, Mady and I will be doing a lot of the groundwork. And the idea is that, the students are also teachers in their own way, right? So we want to make it a very Aquarian school, right? To honor the system and the diverse perspectives. So we can make astrology more recognizable and seen like psychology is seen, right? Because right now people don't really know how to use astrologers yet.
Yeah. And it is an ancient wisdom that we need to start remembering. We need to start bringing back.
And remembering is such a Cancerian word too, I find. Yeah.
We're just finding all these synchronicities.
We'll be launching it on May 18th. And so yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, if you're curious about the school or readings, you can find me on Instagram. I'm at Bru, BRU_Maia, MAIA, or you can go to my website, brunamaia.com.
Oh my gosh. Amazing. Thank you so much for saying yes and coming on the show. I truly believe that this is magic and medicine for the world. And I'm excited for your school because I think that it will offer others permission to really step into this life path who are called to it. And you're really kind of taking these really, really deep ancestral and knowledgeable lessons that you even learned from an 89-year-old man that like, it's almost like this lost technology, but you've been able to like really grasp onto it and hold it and then also like create within it and make it your own and then bring it into the world as your own medicine. And I think that that's really, really important. So I appreciate all the work that you do in life. Another thank you to Parker for bringing us together and like just introducing us to each other, because I feel that we will continue to create magic and we will start to see our lives like collide more and more, which is going to be really fun over the next years to come. And then for everyone listening, knowing that Halloween is now, but the eclipse will reverberate into the next 6 months or more in everyone's lives. So everything that we're manifesting and trying to transform now in our lives will also start to weave into the rest of the year in 2024. So just wanted to say a huge thank you for coming on the show. And is there any last messages that you wanted to share before we head on out?
Well, first of all, I really want to thank you, Jessica. It's such an honor to be here with you. And I just love having conversations with people that are lifelong learners and that are asking big questions and can go deep. So I really appreciate that. And I know that there's a reason why Parker put us together. So I feel him. And in general, I'm very grateful for these conversations because it is bringing to the light there is an educational component to astrology and how it is such an important healing tool for us. So for the listeners, don't be afraid. Get your apps, even if you download the apps that are available to you, get curious about your sun, moon, and rising. And when you feel ready, reach out to an astrologer and deepen.
Okay, so this is a complete side question, and I know we were wrapping up, but I want to ask you: have you like dove into the gene keys at all? Is that like part of your teachings?
The gene keys is a different system. So like human design, it's a different system, but they all have astrology woven in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting, because I've heard a lot of people talk about gene keys. I just got my gene keys book and I was like about to start diving into it, but it sounds like a parallel where you could also learn a lot about yourself through astrology, but also from a different chart.
Yes. It's a slightly different science, but they're consciousness maps. So human design, Enneagram, astrology, gene keys, even the Kabbalah, they're consciousness maps. And the way I see it, Jessica, if they can layer upon each other like Russian dolls, then I get curious.
Okay. I love that imagery. Okay. Thank you for taking that one last question. It just like popped in my brain and I was like, I have to ask. And if I don't, I'll regret it.
Jessica, I think it would be interesting for you to bring a Gene Keys expert too. That's what I'm feeling for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, we would love Richard Rudd, but Richard, are you out there? But yeah, it would be interesting to bring somebody on to kind of see how it weaves a little bit differently. There's that word again. Won't leave my mouth.
Yeah,
today.
it's all over. It's all over. It's
just today. It's been flowing in. Is it because of this? Is this woven? Yeah, but thank you so much. It's been really energetically healing to have this conversation and informative, of course, for me, but also hopefully for the listeners too that have similar planets in their sign. And I highly, highly recommend you guys reach out to Bruna for one-on-one sessions and also check out her school. I will drop your website and link to your Instagram in the show notes so everyone can easily click links and find you. And I'm hoping we can drop in another time to talk about dreams, because that is a whole other thing.
Yes, let's do it, Jessica. I'd love that.
For those of you who don't already know, my husband and I own a coffee company called Gay Head Coffee. And of course, we drink our own coffee every day, and it's some of the most flavorful and inviting coffee, especially with the nostalgia of coming from a can rather than paper or plastic packaging. But I'm biased, so check it out for yourself. If you're interested, head over to the show notes where you will find a link to order your coffee today from gayheadcoffee.com. That's GAYHEADCOFFEE.com. Thank you all for your support. It means the world to us as a small business.
I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me.